In this video, I am going to reveal the Dunkin' menu choices that quietly sabotage your health, from sugar-loaded drinks to snacks that push your heart and waistline to the limit. It all starts with the donuts and the coffee, the innocent little treats that Dunkin' has built its entire empire on. But pull back the frosting, and you find a chemistry set hiding inside that pink box. For years, Dunkin' relied on additives most of us could not even pronounce, let alone recognize as food. Back in 2015, one watchdog group tested the powdered sugar on Dunkin's donuts and found traces of titanium dioxide. Yes, the same whitening agent used in sunscreen. Dunkin quietly promised to remove it after the headlines hit. That was not a one-off slip either. The chain also leaned on something called azodicarbonamide to fluff up its dough. If that name sounds like it belongs in a lab, not a bakery, that is because it does. It is banned in Europe, flagged for respiratory risks, and yet perfectly legal in the United States. Dunkin' and other chains used it for years, betting you would never ask. I remember grabbing a jelly donut on the way to work back in the day. It never crossed my mind that I might be biting into what the press nicknamed the yoga mat chemical. Even when they dress things up as natural, the details are slippery. Those neon glazes that used to coat the donuts? Once powered by petroleum-based dyes. Dunkin' finally switched them out in 2018 for fruit and vegetable extracts after parents and bloggers would not let the issue go. But notice how it always takes outside pressure to make the change. They rarely admit what is in there until someone else forces their hand. That is not exactly the transparency you would expect from a company selling you breakfast. And here is the part that always makes me shake my head. Dunkin' proudly advertises no trans fats and no high fructose corn syrup. Sounds good, right? Until you flip the script and see they are still using corn syrup, still sneaking in emulsifiers, stabilizers, and partially hydrogenated oils, just in amounts small enough they do not have to list them front and center. It is a legal loophole, but for anyone trying to avoid those additives, it feels like a dirty trick. Nutritionists point out that these additives are not just empty calories. Some are tied to inflammation, others to allergic reactions. And for seniors or anyone with a sensitive system, that can mean bloating, fatigue, or worse. I have seen it firsthand. An old coworker swore Dunkin's muffins were triggering her migraines, only to find out later the natural flavors were masking a cocktail of preservatives. When the label says proprietary flavor blend, what it really means is you do not get to know. Yes, Dunkin has taken steps to clean up its image. They phased out dyes, promise better ingredients, and highlight freshness in their ads. But let us be honest, none of us know what is really in that maple frosted donut or that flavored latte syrup. Without independent testing, we are taking their word for it, and their track record does not exactly scream full disclosure. Every time they have fixed something, it has only been after public backlash. The bigger problem is not just the sugar or the fat, it is the uncertainty. It is not knowing whether that breakfast sandwich is wrapped in a smile or in a chemical cocktail you will never see on the menu board. You are trusting a multi-billion-dollar chain to put your health ahead of its profit margins, and history shows that trust might be misplaced. And once you start thinking about it that way, it is hard to look at that glazed donut the same again. Because if the chemicals do not get you, the recalls just might. In early 2025, the FDA flagged a massive recall that pulled more than 2 million Dunkin'-branded baked goods off shelves, everything from pumpkin donuts to glazed coffee rolls. The culprit? Possible listeria contamination at a supplier's plant. And here is the kicker. Listeria is not some minor bug. It is the bacteria that sends thousands to the hospital every year, especially seniors and pregnant women. When the FDA slaps something with a Class 2 risk, it is basically saying, this can cause real harm, even if it will not kill you outright. Dunkin' and their supplier were quick to spin the story. They assured customers none of the tested products showed actual contamination, and besides, most had already expired. But that is a neat trick, is it not? By the time you are told about the risk, the donuts are supposedly long gone. Customers were not buying that line. Many tossed their pastries anyway. And can you blame them? I once cleaned out my fridge after a spinach recall, even though the bag in there was not part of the batch. Once that seed of doubt is planted, The food just does not look the same. What really made people uneasy was how quietly it all went down. No splashy FDA press release at first, no bold public announcement, just a quiet notice and a shrug. News spread through social media instead, where worried customers asked each other if their breakfast was safe. Imagine biting into a French crawler and scrolling your phone to find out it might have been part of a nationwide recall. That morning coffee break suddenly does not feel so carefree. And here is what many forget. This was not Dunkin's first rodeo with safety scares. In past years, baked goods tied to the same supply chain were linked to salmonella outbreaks in the United States. Sure, not all of them carried the Dunkin logo, but if you think a customer at the counter separates supplier recall from the brand I just paid, you are giving the public too much credit. When a national chain sells that much volume, their name gets stapled to every headline. The unsettling part is how vulnerable the system is. These are not problems caused by one sloppy worker behind the counter. They come from industrial bakeries churning out millions of donuts at a time. Listeria loves cool, moist environments, exactly like the industrial mixers and slicers used in donut factories. Once it gets a foothold, it does not just vanish because a company says the affected batch has been discarded. Without constant, rigorous testing, the same risk lingers with the next shipment. Franchise owners cannot do much either. They are at the mercy of the suppliers Dunkin corporate approves. So, while your local store might look spotless, the pastry in that case could still carry baggage from a factory 3 states away. That is the catch with a system this big. No matter how clean the counter looks, you are still trusting an invisible supply chain. And it only takes one slip. One overlooked batch, one bad cleaning cycle, one unnoticed test result, and suddenly millions of breakfast runs are put at risk. The companies will always reassure you that everything is fine, but history shows us that the reassurance comes only after they have already gambled with your trust. That warm Dunkin glow, the one built on nostalgia and coffee runs, does not quite cover up the chill of knowing a donut can end up on a government recall list overnight. And behind that counter, there is a different kind of contamination. One that does not come from bacteria, but from how the people making your coffee and bagels are treated. Over the past decade, the Department of Labor has investigated hundreds of Dunkin locations for wage theft and labor violations. We are not talking about a couple of bad apples here. More than 450 investigations since 2010 uncovered $1.5 million in back pay owed to over 3,600 workers. That is not an accident. That is a pattern. Think about it. Dunkin crew members average around $11 an hour. Full-time, that is barely $23,000 a year before taxes. For a lot of these workers, even when they are paid what they are owed, the math does not add up. Government reports show thousands of Dunkin employees rely on Medicaid or food stamps just to keep going. It is a strange picture. A multi-billion-dollar brand that needs taxpayers to quietly subsidize its payroll. And it gets uglier. Investigations show managers rolling back clock and times to erase overtime. Workers pulling double shifts but somehow ending up short on their paychecks. In Chicago, a class action lawsuit exposed one franchisee literally training managers to game the system so labor looked cheaper on paper. When I worked a summer job at a diner, I knew what it felt like to count on that overtime. Cutting it away feels like cutting oxygen. Even tips are not safe. Those jars on the counter, they do not always go straight to the barista who smiled and handed you that latte. In one 2025 case in Connecticut, a new hire asked why tips were withheld for a full month before being split. Management brushed it off like it was no big deal. When she pressed again, she was suddenly fired over customer complaints. She later sued for illegal wage practices and retaliation. That is the risk workers take just by asking where their money went. The structure of Dunkin makes it worse. Because most stores are franchises, the parent company, Inspire Brands, can claim distance from the mess. If a worker sues, the lawsuit usually lands on the local owner, not corporate headquarters. But when the same violations show up in store after store across 31 states, the few bad franchisees excuse starts to wear thin. And the truth is, customers rarely notice. We grab a coffee, maybe drop a buck in the jar, and then move on. But behind the cheerful "America runs on Dunkin" slogan is A workforce running on fumes, people patching shifts together, leaning on government aid, or hustling a second job because the first one does not cover rent. I have seen folks come off an overnight shift only to clock into another job hours later. That is not just a grind. That is survival mode. The irony? Dunkin markets itself as community-driven, like a friendly neighborhood stop, but the same brand image is built on squeezing every possible penny from the people pouring your coffee. You can sanitize a kitchen to keep out listeria, but no amount of polish covers up the exploitation baked into the business model. And once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. The smiling cashier handing you a bagel may be fighting a paycheck that has been shaved down by someone upstairs. But what if I told you, in some Dunkin stores, it is not even adults behind that counter? Federal investigators have caught teenagers, kids barely into high school, mixing dough, firing up ovens, and working shifts that stretched late into the night. The law could not be clearer. Under 16, you do not belong anywhere near power-driven bakery machines. Yet in Connecticut, investigators found minors prepping bagel dough and handling ovens in 2019. The franchise was fined and ordered to put safeguards in place, but that was not the end of it. By 2025, Massachusetts Attorney General uncovered something bigger. 36 franchise operators, including 15 Dunkin outlets, hit with $226,000 in penalties for child labor violations. One chain alone, Kafua Management, which runs around 80 Dunkin stores, was fined $140,000 for letting kids as young as 13 scrub counters, pour syrups, and work past curfews. If you have ever seen a middle schooler dragging their backpack home at 3 p.m., picture that same kid wiping tables at 10 at night. And it is not just Massachusetts. A Dunkin franchise group in Maryland and West Virginia admitted in 2023 that 14 and 15-year-olds were regularly tasked with mixing ingredients and running ovens. The government hit them with a $41,000 penalty and forced managers into child labor training. Inspectors did not mince words. Injuries and exploitation in these cases are wholly preventable. Translation: this did not happen by accident. It happened because someone decided cutting corners was worth the risk. For the kids, the risks are obvious. Burn scars do not heal overnight, and late-night shifts steal hours meant for homework or rest. For parents, it is chilling to think the cute little coffee shop job might actually put their 14-year-old in harm's way. I remember bussing tables at 15, half the battle was just not spilling a tray. I cannot imagine being told to run an oven. The franchise system makes this worse. Because Dunkin is fractured into thousands of operators, violations often slide under the radar until a whistleblower speaks up or the Department of Labor launches an investigation. It is like playing whack-a-mole, fix one store, and another pops up 2 states over. Corporate headquarters can wave their hands and say, "That is not us, that is the franchisee." But when the same violations surface year after year, that defense rings hollow. And here is what really stings. Dunkin sells itself as a community brand. The commercials are all about family, warmth, and your local crew. But the reality? Some of those local crews are made up of kids illegally clocking in, kids who should be in bed or at a basketball game. The same parents who grab a dozen donuts for the Saturday soccer team might not realize a 13-year-old was behind the counter stacking that box. Once you peel back the layers, the picture gets darker. These are not just one-off mistakes. They are systemic shortcuts, cheap labor disguised as opportunity. And when you find out the company has been fined again and again across multiple states, it starts to feel less like oversight and more like business as usual. That is the hidden story behind the smiling teen at the register. Not summer pocket money, but a corporate model willing to push kids past the line of safety and legality just to keep the fryer running. And once you know that, it changes the way you look at every America Runs on Dunkin commercial. Because if you think the questionable labor practices were bad, wait until you see how the marketing team has managed to trip over its own shoelaces. Dunkin has always built its brand on being lighthearted, catchy, and fun. Those goofy jingles that get stuck in your head while you are pumping gas. But in 2025, they launched a new drink called the Golden Hour Refresher. And the ad they paired with it blew up for all the wrong reasons. They brought in actor Gavin Castellano, star of The Summer I Turned Pretty. Seems harmless enough, right? Just another fresh-faced celebrity sipping an iced drink and smiling for the camera. Except the script leaned into lines about golden looks and genetics, and suddenly Dunkin' was not selling coffee, it was stumbling straight into a culture war. Viewers did not just roll their eyes. They lit up social media with outrage. Comments like, "What in the Sydney Sweeney did I just watch?" And "This ad is super effective in making sure I am never going to Dunkin' again," were not jokes. They were people saying the brand had crossed a line. What was meant to be a cheeky summer ad instead came across as tone-deaf, with critics pointing out how celebrating golden genes smacked of Eurocentric beauty standards. Some even accused it of brushing up against eugenics territory. Now, Dunkin' was not called outright racist, but the timing could not have been worse. The country has been grappling with real conversations about race, identity, and inclusivity. And here comes a billion-dollar coffee chain trying to ride a viral trend about inherited traits. It did not land as playful, it landed as offensive. I will be honest, I have sat through plenty of bad ads in my lifetime, but I have never seen a company make people boycott over a glass of iced tea. And this was not their first stumble. Back in 2021, Dunkin' sponsored a music video called "Lucky Me, I Am an American." The whole thing played like a quirky lounge scene in a Dunkin' cafe. But critics slammed it for trivializing military service and glossing over the messy realities of war. Another time, a leaked redesign of the Dunkin' logo sparked a flood of online memes, turning what should have been a fresh brand update into a punchline. See the pattern? Dunkin' sells itself as the every-person brand, the one that is supposed to feel safe, relatable, and a little bit nostalgic. But when you misread the room, when you forget who is actually buying your product, you do not just look silly, you look out of touch. And today, being out of touch is one of the quickest ways to lose loyalty. For the average customer, these marketing fiascos do not clog arteries like fried chicken or sneak chemicals into your coffee, but they do something subtler. They erode trust. They remind people that the folks making decisions at corporate headquarters might not understand the communities they claim to serve. And when you already have doubts about what is in your food or how workers are treated, that shaky trust can be the thing that pushes you toward the door. Dunkin' tried to do damage control, of course. They issued the standard PR line, "We did not mean to offend." But by then, the memes had spread, the hashtags had circulated, and the sting was already out there. One clumsy ad campaign turned into another reason for critics to say, "See? This company does not really get it." That is the risk with marketing today. One careless phrase, one tone-deaf image, and suddenly you are not just selling drinks, you are defending your values in the court of public opinion. And the people sitting in that jury box, they are your customers. So while the Golden Hour Refresher itself may have just been sugar water in a plastic cup, the fallout from its ad revealed something far more important. Even the strongest brands can trip over their own story. And when that happens, it is not the drink that leaves a bad taste, it is the company. But the story does not stop at bad ads. The cup in your hand tells its own story too, and it is not one you want to hear. Dunkin' has been hammered for years over the same problem: waste. Foam cups, plastic lids, sandwich wrappers, they pile up faster than a drive-through line on Monday morning. Groups like As You Sow flat out called them out for dragging their feet, still using polystyrene long after promising to ditch it. Foam does not just vanish when you toss it. It lingers for centuries, breaking into toxic crumbs that poison waterways and kill marine life. The frustrating part? Competitors have already moved on. Starbucks hands out discounts for reusable cups and recycles in store. McDonald's switched to paper cups years ago. Dunkin', meanwhile, made big pledges but did not deliver clear recycling bins or serious targets in restaurants. That is like swearing you will get fit this year but never buying the gym shoes. The intent sounds nice, but the results speak for themselves. And it is not just about the cups. Think of the energy behind every glazed donut and cup of coffee. Roasting beans, frying dough, shipping ingredients across oceans, it all adds up. Palm oil, in particular, is a sore spot. Dunkin' promised sustainable palm oil back in 2014, but only in US stores at first. Meanwhile, forests in Asia and South America kept getting bulldozed to plant more palm. Orangutans lose their homes so we can dunk a crawler in coffee. Even after they went global with the policy, Watchdogs still handed Dunkin an F for moving too slow. Coffee itself has a hidden tab too. Fertilizers, shipping, child labor, pick your issue, and it's probably tied to those beans. Dunkin says it'll get to 100% responsibly sourced coffee by 2025 with Rainforest Alliance certifications. Sounds good on paper, but here's the catch. Until third-party audits are transparent, it's just marketing ink. I've seen enough corporate promises in my lifetime to know half of them don't leave the PowerPoint slide. Even the trendy stuff comes with baggage. Yes, they cut the surcharge on plant milks in 2023, which was long overdue. But almond milk guzzles water like crazy, oat milk farms chew up land, and all of it still comes in single-use cartons that end up in your trash bin. It's swapping one footprint for another, but the brand still pats itself on the back for being progressive. Now think about your order. Small coffee, breakfast sandwich, maybe a snack. That's 3 wrappers, a plastic lid, a stir stick, and a cream cup, all in the bin before 10 a.m. Multiply that by millions of customers every day. It's no wonder bins overflow by lunchtime. Dunkin even sells their coffee in retail bags that are recyclable if mailed back. Who's really mailing their trash to a recycling center? Not the people I know. I'll admit I used to shrug at this stuff. Toss a cup, move on. But over the years, watching plastic pile up and news clips of dead fish with bellies full of foam pellets, it hits different. When a company brags America runs on Dunkin, what they don't say is the planet runs on waste. And every sip comes with an environmental receipt that most customers never see. That's the part the ads won't show you. Behind every friendly cashier and frosted donut is a supply chain burning energy, forests cut down for palm, and cups that outlive the very people who drank from them. And no matter how sweet they make the coffee, that's a bitter truth that lingers. The bigger problem, though, is what happens behind the counter, not just in the kitchen, but in the boardroom. Dunkin isn't run like Starbucks. Starbucks owns most of its stores, so when something goes wrong, the buck stops at headquarters. Dunkin? Nearly every one of its 500 U.S. locations is franchised out. That's great for rapid growth, but terrible when it comes to accountability. Take the Kafua management case. This was no small-time operator, it was a family outfit that owned dozens of Dunkin stores. They got nailed for wage theft and even child labor violations. You'd think corporate would step in with an apology, maybe overhaul its training, something. Instead, Dunkin brushed it off, reminding everyone that Kafua was independent. Translation, not our problem. That's the shield of franchising: make the profits off the brand, dodge the fallout when things blow up. And here's the kicker. In 2020, Dunkin was bought by Inspire Brands, the same people behind Arby's and Buffalo Wild Wings. $11.3 billion changed hands, and since then, Dunkin's been just one piece of a private equity puzzle. Inspire pushes tech upgrades and sleek next-gen stores. But when a labor scandal pops up, crickets. Private equity isn't famous for transparency, and Dunkin no longer files public financials. What you hear now comes from lawsuits, not press releases. That setup trickles down to store owners, too. Franchisees pay hefty royalty fees, and profit margins are razor thin. When money gets tight, where do you think they cut corners? Ingredients, staffing, wages. It's why you hear stories about managers skimming tips or hiring kids illegally. Not because every owner is shady, but because the system practically dares them to bend the rules. The SV Donuts case in Maryland shows how ugly it can get. A manager refused to hire a lawful permanent resident because she didn't have a green card despite having the proper paperwork. The Justice Department stepped in, fined the franchisee, and forced anti-discrimination training. Again, corporate shrugged, saying essentially, well, that was their franchise, not us. If you're keeping score, that's 2 strikes against workers, and still no clear corporate accountability. Even the customer experience can swing wildly depending on who owns the store. Some franchisees keep things spotless, others cut staff until service drags. Corporate might set the menu, but everything else, hiring, cleanliness, pricing, depends on the local owner. That's why your Dunkin' coffee tastes different in one town versus the next. I've had locations where the coffee was fresh and hot every time, and others where it tasted like it had been sitting in the pot since yesterday morning. And the marketing? Same story. Local owners can run promos or experiment with menu tweaks, sometimes to the point of looking like an off-brand diner. When it works, corporate takes credit. When it doesn't, the franchisee is left holding the bag. Either way, Dunkin' HQ avoids the heat. Consumer advocates have been saying for years that Dunkin' needs to enforce stricter standards across its franchisees. A clear code of conduct, better oversight, something to make sure the brand's name actually means something. But until that happens, the loophole stays wide open. Franchisees get fined, workers suffer, and Dunkin' Corporate keeps its hands clean. That's the hidden engine powering those pink and orange signs you see on every corner. It's not just coffee and donuts, it's a corporate structure designed to rake in profits while sidestepping responsibility. And once you see it that way, every "America runs on Dunkin" ad hits a little differently. Because the truth is, that cheap coffee isn't really cheap at all. Someone's paying the bill, you just don't see it on the receipt. Dunkin' keeps wages low and benefits almost non-existent, which means thousands of its workers end up leaning on government programs just to get by. In Massachusetts alone, over 1,000 Dunkin' employees were on SNAP benefits in 2020, more than any other employer in the state. That's not just an accident, that's a business model. What that means in plain English is this. Every time you hand over $1 for your morning cup, the taxpayers are covering the real cost of the person who poured it. Medicaid, food stamps, housing assistance programs meant to catch the vulnerable are quietly subsidizing a multi-billion-dollar coffee chain. Dunkin' gets to pocket the profit, while the rest of us foot the bill. In Maine, Dunkin' ranked in the top 3 employers whose workers were on Medicaid and SNAP. Think about that. The people serving up your frosty donut holes and extra-large iced coffees often can't even afford to buy them without government help. I've known folks who worked fast food in their teens just to cover gas money, and the paychecks barely stretched then. Imagine trying to raise a family on it today. Critics have called it a hidden subsidy for fast food giants. By keeping wages pinned near the minimum, Dunkin' makes sure prices stay low enough to keep the lines moving, while public assistance fills in the gaps for the people behind the counter. It's like a shell game. The company saves pennies, the customer thinks they're getting a bargain, and the taxpayer unknowingly covers the rest. And the cost doesn't stop at the paycheck. There's the health tab too. A glazed donut might look harmless, but combine it with a sugar-loaded coffee, and you've just slammed your body with a blast of sugar and fat that doctors say fuels obesity, diabetes, and heart disease over time. Hospital ERs don't send bills to Dunkin'. When those problems hit, they send them to insurance companies, Medicaid, and taxpayers. One coffee run doesn't do the damage, but years of habit? That adds up fast. Think about how often Dunkin' markets itself as quick fuel for busy Americans. Convenience is the hook, but convenience isn't free. Someone always pays the long-term price, whether it's in tax-funded health programs or higher insurance premiums for everyone else. That sugary iced latte might cost you $4 at the counter, but society could be paying hundreds later to treat the fallout of diets built on daily fast food. It creates what some call the Dunkin' dividend, a silent payout the company takes at society's expense. Their glossy ads sell joy and togetherness, but behind the curtain, the numbers tell a colder story. Dunkin' saves money on labor, Dunkin' profits on addictive, low-cost ingredients, and the public, whether they buy a donut or not, ends up covering the hidden bill in taxes and healthcare costs. The irony is sharp. The slogan says, "America runs on Dunkin'," but maybe the truth is America's taxpayers are the ones running Dunkin'. And the next time you sip that bargain coffee, you might wonder if you're really getting a deal, or if someone else already paid the difference for you. And if that's not enough to make you think twice before stepping in line again, just wait until you see what's still hidden deeper in the menu, because the story doesn't end with the price tag, it's just beginning. So before you grab that next order, remember, fast food never comes cheap, no matter what the sign says. And once you know the real cost, it's hard to taste it the same way again.